5 Challenges of Managing Virtual Servers will be presented by John Richardson. John is the Service Director of the Managed Service Group at GlassHouse and has over 30 years of experience in IT service delivery. He is currently the Delivery Executive for a service partnership with a major outsourcing provider. Ladies and gentlemen, John Richardson.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us. Virtualization is a wonderful thing, and the growth of virtualization is, if you listen to the manufacturers, is like a really, really good party. Everyone's having fun, good times, all that. If you're on this webinar, though, you're probably not at that party. You're probably having a little bit different experience. What we're going to cover today is how virtualization is transforming server management from a commodity to a crucial challenge. It used to be easy. What happened? We'll talk about 5 specific challenges of managing virtual servers. We'll give you some key elements you need in order to address those 5 challenges, and then give you some options as to how to get those key elements. So let's talk about what happened. How did we get from commodity to this place? In the old days, the good old days, servers were very low utilization, less than 20% typically. You had one application, one server. You get an application, you buy a server, procurement handles it all. Very nice. And then management was simple because your performance and stability were related to a single box. You had a low rate of change. You didn't need tools. Most of us were flying blind during those times. But then came virtualization, the lure of server virtualization. Everybody loves virtualization on PowerPoint. It promised improved services. Maybe it was simply faster provisioning, or maybe you're thinking further down the road towards dynamic computing or private cloud. Certainly, higher asset utilization has already begun to be a result for a lot of folks using virtualization at this point. From a DR perspective, it's been a breakthrough. Server virtualization has democratized disaster recovery, in that now almost any organization can afford real live workable and testable DR by using the capabilities of server virtualization. Folks are looking for more efficient environments, and even the tree huggers are liking the reduced carbon footprint. But most of all, that big blue circle in the middle, cost savings, is what has been driving server virtualization and its growth. But server virtualization has hit a wall. The research group ESG Research published a paper last month called The Evolution of Server Virtualization. And it talked to CIOs of enterprises and found some pretty interesting results that would say that if you feel like you're the only one that's not at the manufacturer's party, you may not be alone. So the first thing that they got was in asking the CIO's priorities for IT. They said, what was your top priority? And there were top 10 priorities in this survey. What were the top 10 last year, and what are the top 10 for this year? And in both cases, the number 1 priority was to increase the use of server virtualization. And that's probably not surprising, but what does get to be surprising is that most organizations that they talked to had virtualized less than 1/3 of their servers. And the applications that they've been using in virtualization so far have not, for the most part, been including mission-critical applications. It's been IT applications. So what is this party really like, and why has server virtualization hit a wall? Well, in the survey they asked, and obviously budget is one that you would expect in that virtualization projects take money to fund, but the rest of them are pretty interesting also. Getting virtual servers to perform in a way that's consistent, predictable, so that they can meet business needs is important. They talked about the stubbornness of legacy applications that were written before the pervasiveness of VMware, and saying getting those converted has been a challenge and has slowed them down. Understanding the security involved in virtualization. What are the new implications of that? Similar problem with data protection. How does virtualization of servers change the way you back up your data and restore it? Meeting SLAs, being able to not only have predictable stability and performance, but being able to measure that and report that back to the business have been critical things in slowing down. If you put lack of skills in there, it can be a category unto itself that sort of drives all the rest of this. So these are the issues that people are saying are preventing them from growing faster. And we've called out 5 particular challenges to drill down for this webinar. Challenge number 1 is virtual server sprawl. Challenge number 2, performance and stability. Challenge number 3, integrating the virtual server infrastructure with the rest of the infrastructure. Challenge number 4, the shortage of skills. And challenge number 5, business risk. Now certainly these are not the only challenges out there, but these are ones that are worth drilling down into. So let's do that. Virtual server sprawl. If you look at the quote from the VMware guy, he says it's easy to make a VM. People create lots of VMs, but they increase complexity and connections geometrically. So that is a huge impact on your infrastructure when you can make them easily. Rapid provisioning is pervasive. And in the old days, you couldn't get a server without going through procurement. And that made life easy because procurement was good at slowing things down and making sure that all the checkboxes got checked and raising flags and communicating if people didn't follow the rules. Now, a sysadmin can fire up a server. And they do. And they do it a lot. And some of the implications of server sprawl, not just having them all over the place, but they're getting created without security and compliance in test environments and then getting pushed into production. And of course, they're only getting pushed into production for just for now, and then we'll fix it later and take them out of production. But who is the watchdog that makes sure just for now really is just for now? In most organizations, nobody does that. Another implication that is there from easy provisioning is when you automatically assign storage to a provisioned VM, and then that VM gets decommissioned or just goes off into Never Never Land, does that storage ever get reclaimed, or do you have great islands of expensive storage out there that are associated with nothing, waiting to be reclaimed? So virtual server sprawl is a reality for a lot of organizations and not a fun one. One CIO I'm pals with relates that the growth of virtual servers in his organization all over the place reminds him of Rule 31 of Zombieland. Check the back seat. So that's virtual server sprawl. Let's next look at performance and stability. Because, you know, virtual server sprawl probably isn't an inhibitor to growth of virtualization, but it's certainly a risk. But performance and stability can be a real inhibitor. And when we look at the concept of virtualization itself, after-the-fact integration may be a kind way of putting it. But what it is it's technology that was designed to take applications that were designed in most cases to be sitting on a dedicated box, and it's allowing them to be shared with other applications on a single box. There are other words for after-the-fact integration that you guys probably have in your own vocabulary. But the truth is that a lot of the applications that were written before VMware don't behave well. We saw the application compatibility as an inhibitor in that survey. And it's not just compatibility with VMware, but the ability to cohabitate with other applications. And so this puts you in a tough position. You either have to take on an unmeasurable amount of risk from a stability and performance point of view to put these applications onto a virtualized server, or you've got to put them on their own dedicated servers, which undermines the value of virtualization in the first place. So that's stability, but performance management is a really tricky part of this, and one that is very much overlooked as folks start getting involved in virtualization. And that is when you had less than 20% utilization on a server, performance management was nothing. It just wasn't that important. Now we're sharing servers and we're trying to get 60 to 80% utilization, and suddenly it becomes critical to be able to see what you've got, to be able to manage that. And flying blind is not going to work. You've got to know for every application what the performance characteristics are. What is their resource consumption? You not only have to know how much resource they consume, but you have to know when they consume it. And you have to know that for every application and then coordinate those schedules as if you're managing a fast food restaurant. It can be extremely challenging from that point of view to balance the utilization, performance, and risk in your infrastructure. So that's performance and stability. Let's look at integrating with the infrastructure. Let's assume you could cure the skill shortage of virtualization people. The truth is that virtualization sits in the middle of your infrastructure like a hub and changes everything. So storage used to be a lot simpler, but now it becomes a critical performance element. It's not just keeping capacity available, but making sure you've got the IOPS to drive your infrastructure. How you do that, how you allocate storage, how you tier, how you reclaim, all becomes more complex in light of the fact that now these are virtual servers. The backup model is changing right now. It's been changing ever since virtualization started. Questions are, do we do file backup or image backup? Do we use dedicated specialty software programs dedicated to backing up virtual servers? Or should we start experimenting with the new releases of the standard software releases that allegedly back up? And will our teams understand how to do this? Certainly the network is impacted dramatically. If we had 20 servers each with their own NIC card, that's a great thing. Now if those 20 servers are all sitting on one host, suddenly the architecture of the network, the flow, your bottlenecks have all changed. So certainly that's a big impact going on under the hood. We talked about the application compatibility issues. And then security. What do we know about security of a virtualized environment? And do the rapid provisioning and easy movement among servers create new risks? Do we have to worry about whether test dev servers that don't have much security on them suddenly get pushed out into the public domain and suddenly there's no checkpoint when they get pushed out there to make sure they've got proper security? Or when we're using vMotion, what are the security implications of that? So challenge number 3 is that it's not just the server guys that have to understand this. It's your entire infrastructure team. So let's take these issues of server sprawl, performance stability, integration, and add to it that there's a skill shortage out there. And back to ESG Research's report, they said 33% of enterprises want to add more headcount in both deployment and administration. 25% of the enterprises consider their shortage of skills to be problematic. So we've got this skill shortage actually exacerbates all of the other problems because it creates not only a finite amount of skill to be able to be applied, it means you've got to prioritize where those skilled people spend their time. You have additional risk of those people saying, I can get more money to go across the street. This has always been a problem in IT. And so you've got a whole number of things conspiring to make the skill shortage very challenging for you. And then finally, all these things add up to a level of business risk that when you get down to it, what is slowing the growth? It's the fact that IT executives are saying there's too much risk in what we're doing, in flying blind, in being overly dependent on a few people, for us to subject the business to that. And that's why we're not getting the growth we'd like. That's why there are only a third of our servers virtualized. That's why we haven't put any mission-critical applications onto virtualized platforms. You know, and adding to that business risk out there is the communication gap. And there's normally a communication gap between talking to the business about business requirements and gotta have and nice to have, and the technologies that enable business functions in IT. But virtualization really brings that to a head because organizations are looking for what virtualization can deliver, that is faster provisioning, more flexible computing, the ability to have real live disaster recovery and business continuity in an affordable way. These are all new things that are really good. But as we've seen, they're not without challenge. And having people who can talk to the business about that without getting to the point of saying, well, the version of the hypervisor we're using and the legacy application that you're using isn't going to be supported until next spring's release of VM, that will turn off the business owners very quickly and put us in a place where we're isolated from them. So you've got that communication gap adding to your business risk. And then finally, we got to look at business controls. We've talked about how easy it is to spin up servers, how easy it is to change a server from one status to another, how easy it is to change a workload from one server to the next server. And the question, all sorts of things have to go out there. We used to have our compliance focused around procurement. We can't do that anymore. Where does that go? So those are the 5 challenges. And they seem to be legitimate challenges, and I'm sure some of you out there are saying, well, that one's not a problem for me, or here's one you didn't think of. Certainly they're all out there. But when we look at what it takes to get over the hump and deal with these challenges, it really does come down to the classic skills, process controls, and tools that are needed to be successful in virtual server management. Let's talk about each of these in a little bit of detail as the things that you need. So skills. We talked about the fact that server implementation skills are needed. And actually, if server sprawl is what we think it is, the implementation skills probably aren't as scarce as some of the other skills, like managing those servers. So you've got to be able to keep track of what the performance is on them, what the capacity is, which is certainly a function of the performance. You've got to be able to look under the hood and avoid problems. You've got to be able to relate to the business how these servers are doing and be able to make good decisions that balance what you're trying to accomplish from a financial point of view in consolidation, what you're trying to deliver to the business in value of faster provisioning, and in risk to the business in terms of performance and stability. Just getting the technical side of that is challenging right now. But it's not just the server guy again. It's the associated upgrades that you've got to get in network, storage, backup, security, and database, who are all impacted by virtual servers. And then something that a lot of folks don't consider is if you were to bring in new, more skilled people or train up the people that you have so that they've got these skills, they're all worth a lot more with this skill set than they were before with commodity management skill sets. And the management layer of these people is something you've got to look at. If you've been light on that before, adding this new layer of specialty, of certifications, of market value may exacerbate some problems that you've had in the past. So we've looked at skills that you've got to have everywhere from the server people to the other infrastructure, the management. Where do you get them? Well, obviously you can train, you can bring on new people, which has got some risk, especially in a constrained marketplace. You'll be probably shocked at what people think they can earn in this area, and some of them can. And then also staff aug companies are out there to help you. And we'll drill down more on these options in a bit. Let's look at processes and controls. And we've talked about this a couple times now. How do you get your business compliance rules in place? How can you go to your shareholders and say, we have this under control? You need a new oversight model for that, because procurement is no longer a gateway that stops this from happening, whether it be firing up new servers or moving them or change control. All those things need to be adapted to that. But one of the more subtle things that may not be obvious is that you've got to move from a reactive to a proactive model now that you're highly consolidated. Having 60 to 80% utilization, having more than 10 applications on a single box, you've got a lot more eggs in a single basket than you did back in the good old days. And so being a good firefighter, making the diving catch, getting the server back up quickly no longer cuts it. You've got to be able to avoid those failures. And that is a totally different type of operation. People who are excited by firefighting will find the mundane processes of documentation, of preventive testing, of checking under the hood to make sure performance is right, to be things that are, some of them might even consider it wastes of time. But the truth is, as you start consolidating these things right at the hub of your infrastructure, you absolutely have to take on a more proactive and fire prevention mode as opposed to firefighting. And that, even just swapping people out doesn't make that happen. That puts the challenge back in your shoes as leaders of IT. You've got to be able to drive that change among your teams and provide two-way communication with the business so that they can understand the business dimensions of these changes. They can be involved in the decision-making that helps ensure things like compliance are handled properly, and that they really understand the level of protection and the level of exposure that they have in the virtualized environment. So processes and controls sometimes can be overlooked, but they really are a big deal. Finally, let's look at tools. We said you can't fly blind anymore, and it's true. You've got to be able to monitor both stability and performance, and as we mentioned, you've got to be able to avoid outages. And so it may be that the tools that you've got on your shelves were not designed for virtualization, won't look separately at what a hypervisor is doing versus the guests and all those kinds of things that you need. You may not have the history of performance tracking that you need. So if you come across a performance anomaly, you've got to be able to look under the hood and say, when did that start? How long have I had that? Have I just not noticed that? And that's been going on for weeks. Without the right tools, you're not going to be able to tell. And most monitoring tools that are deployed in organizations pre-virtualization, and again, there wasn't much demand, you could fly blind back then, really at best did a good job of up-down, and if something went down, would generate an email to the help desk so that somebody could get going on it. Well, the bar is set a lot higher. The good news is that there are a lot of tools out there on the market right now that will allow you to do anything from the standard license purchase and stand up your own infrastructure and manage it, et cetera, to very convenient software as a service implementations out there where you can just have them drop their tool in and monitor your infrastructure and get the feedback that you need. But the bottom line on this, the not so good news, is that the challenges of tool implementations over the years haven't been that the software was no good. They've really revolved around the fact that managing a monitoring tool, making sure it's implemented properly, making sure that it is tuned so that a number of alerts you're getting is appropriate, that you're not getting a lot of noise, which all these infrastructure elements generate a lot of monitoring noise. But that noise is filtered down so that you're getting the meaningful alerts that you need and you're getting them when you need it. That is an extremely daunting challenge, and that has not gotten easier. And certainly in a dynamic computing environment where the rules of tuning change frequently, that's not easier either. So having those skills in-house to be able to operate the tools on an ongoing basis is certainly a significant challenge out there that you've got to look at as you look to invest in tools. So let's look at some options for obtaining those key elements. We looked at the 5 challenges. We looked at the 3 keys that you need in terms of skills, process control, and tools to address them. Now let's see where you might get them. In-house investments are where most people have been going historically to get there. And as they're hitting the wall, they're starting to ask questions and say, maybe there's a different approach. But doing it in-house gives you a lot of control and a lot of independence as to how the outcome comes out. If you haven't got all the staffing you need, agencies can provide you a broad range of skills. But it still can be very much the fact that you've got to come up with the recipe, you've got to come up with the management leadership. Now, managed hosting providers are an interesting option because they can get you out of the CapEx business if that's something that's on your agenda, and they can also provide the management that you need at a very high level of skill. The trick of this is that to get into a managed hosting environment, and this is either cloud or pre-cloud, depending on how you're looking at it, is that you really have to know your infrastructure well from a business perspective. You've got to understand what your business requirements are for availability, for things like IOPS, for things, all the things that they're going to put into a SAL and the SLAs that they're going to have, you have to know your requirements. And if you haven't got a really tightly managed environment with lots of tools and lots of reporting, the really key data points that are going to be critical to your giving these folks your infrastructure is going to be a challenge to come up with. So managed hosting providers, if you've got that data, can be a really good option. And finally, managed service providers are ones where you can retain control of your infrastructure and your assets, evolve those at the pace you'd like to. You can choose which functions you want to have serviced and which functions you want to retain in-house, and they're location agnostic, but you do get rapid access to what they have there. We can drill into that in a little bit more as to why they might be a good option for you. So you get a broad range of relevant skills in all the disciplines out there. And the interesting thing is, even if you only had the provider do managed service, in a lot of cases they've got the storage and backup experts that can consult with you. So even as you retain those functions in-house, you've got the ability to tap into the full range of that provider's skill. You know, we consult with a lot of organizations on how to implement really strong infrastructures, and it gets down to making sure they've got the skills, making sure the tools and the processes are there. And a typical implementation plan we'll give to a customer wanting to do this in-house is 12 to 18 months of investment time and changing the way they do things to get to that best practice environment. And that's not risk adjusted to the extent that the project could become derailed if other priorities come up, if a key player leaves the business, etc. So this allows you to take that risk out of implementation and get very quick implementation of the best practices that you need. It also allows you to reduce your risk on the performance and stability side by having folks already skilled in how to manage these things, who've already got the tools selected and implemented, and give you a bit of insulation of risk of key employees leaving. But the bottom line is that a good managed service relationship can help you deploy virtualization more quickly and more completely. So we've talked about the 5 challenges: server sprawl, performance stability, integration with the infrastructure, the skills shortage, and business risk. We've talked about the skills, the tools, the process controls that you need to tackle that. We've talked about some options as to where to get them. Key takeaways for today are that the capital savings that we're all trying to get from server virtualization can be lost if a solid management plan isn't in place. The items that are stalling current deployments out there are not necessarily going to get easier anytime soon. So waiting it out may not be a good strategy here, because of course manufacturers are going to continue to come up with new products that push the envelope of ROI, that deliver much better performance, much better cost savings, but are in fact much more difficult to manage. And enterprises like yourselves are faced with a rising ante in managing these complex infrastructures. So if you think you're missing the party of virtualization where everyone's having fun and everything's going well and there are no worries, we don't think there are a lot of people at that party. The data doesn't suggest that. It says that if you're feeling like there are challenges to managing your virtual servers, you're not alone.
Thank you so much for joining us for today's webcast. Join us next month when GlassHouse will be discussing cloud. Have a great rest of your day.